Hello, everybody. I'm Hannah Starrick from Advertising Council Australia. Hope you're all well. We'll get started very soon. Maybe just pop in the chat where you're joining from, which agency, which state. It's always good to see who's here on the meeting, even though I can't see your faces. Hello, the Dentsu crew. Hi, Tim. The chemistry from around the country, AJF. Special. Hi, Katie. The Works. Hi, Vivian. MNC. TBWA. +61. Hi, Anthony. Good to have everybody joining. Avas host. Hello, hello. Thanks for coming along. I promise this will be a fun session. It sounds so very dry from its title, but it's not. It's actually quite an interesting topic once you lean in. So we've got quite a lot of people joining today. And just before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We would also like to acknowledge their culture of storytelling through art, dance, and music. And we pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So you're all here because you work for one of our almost 90 member agency brands, and Advertising Council Australia is the peak body for Australia's leading agencies in the ad industry. Our purpose is to foster the long-term prosperity of the industry, making advertising the most valued professional service in Australia. And that word professional is actually central to what we're doing today. You can see here a sort of snapshot of our members around the country. We have lots of different brands represented, and at the bottom you can see some of our members of the Commercial Producers Council as well, which is our sort of sister organisation. Hopefully you all have got a good idea of what Ad Council does, but just in case you need a refresher, we really do bring the whole creative and advertising community together in a number of different ways, from research into advertising effectiveness, the growth agenda, which is our partnership with The Australian on a Monday, our 3-day creative festival in August, which is called This Way Up. That's scheduled to run again this year. The award awards, which are open for entries as we speak, and Award School, which we have a free information night next week, which would be is a great way of getting some more information about the program if you're interested in applying this year. The Effie Awards, which will be opening for entries around about the end of February, and Create Space as well, which is one of my big passions, and that's our diversity and inclusion program. We ran a census at the end of 2023. We're crunching the numbers, and we'll be revealing the updated findings towards the end of March, early April. We've also launched our agency accreditation scheme, which is designed to raise and recognise the professional standards of our member agencies. Now, working in advertising is not, it's not really a highly regulated industry, but we're really trying to encourage people to invest in professional standards, which includes a commitment to offering codes and compliance training to all staff. So make sure that you continue to champion this type of education in your agencies. It does make a difference. So, okay, let's move on to the guts of today's presentation. If you do have questions, please use the chat function throughout. I'll keep an eye on it and try and answer anything live. And I will ask you to pop a few thoughts or ideas into the chat throughout. So keep that open. we'll start with the an overview of the landscape, which is quite complex, but don't kind of get too hung up on this. We're going to focus on the two critical areas that we all need to understand in order to provide professional counsel to our clients and uphold our industry's ethical standards. So first, we are going to briefly touch on legislation and regulation, ACA the law, and this sits at the top of our regulatory framework, of course. This involves the courts, serious fines for wrongdoing. That's the Competition and Consumer Act, etc. So we're going to touch on that. But the most of today's session, we're going to look at our self-regulatory system, which is namely the AANA's Code of Ethics, which is our core self-regulatory code. And this provides an overarching set of principles with which all advertising and marketing communications across all media should comply. There aren't any fines for wrongdoing, but essentially it's on us to do a good job of policing ourselves so that the law doesn't need to get involved. Of course, the law overrides all the codes, and the AANA's Code of Ethics is kind of the master method around across all the other various product and delivery specific guidance, which we won't go into today because a lot of it is captured in the self-regulatory code. Now, why does this matter? Why are you here? Why are we banging on about this so much? It's probably quite a, I guess, something that not everybody has paid attention to over the years. But, other than the reason that we all like to act in a way that's legal, decent, honest, and truthful, ACA member agencies are actually all obligated to abide by these codes as a condition of membership. That's one of the reasons why being an ACA member is meaningful. But more importantly, it's critical to our professional reputation. And if we're all working in this industry and don't really understand the regulatory environment, the legal environment, that it doesn't reflect that well on us as an industry. And clients rely on us to advise them in effective marketing communications. They don't really want to change or remove an ad that you as a specialist have created for them due to a problem with compliance. And yes, of course, they do have responsibility for approving the work, but you may discover that your clients actually don't necessarily know all the details or perhaps understand how community sentiment is shifting. So knowing this world and being able to advise and provide that guidance is a really valuable service. And it does actually impact every stage of the advertising process, from taking a brief, writing a brief, doing research, reviewing creative work, briefing production, reviewing casting, and even the editing, layout, final artwork or final edit. It all has, there's always a role to play. So don't tune out just because you're not in account management. It actually does apply to all of us working in the industry. So let's start with an overview of the big end of town. This is the Competition and Consumer Act and its enforcer, the ACCC. So what is the ACCC? You've probably heard of them. They're an independent statutory authority. Their prime role is to protect consumers by enforcing the Competition and Consumer Act and other legislation, like rights to repairs or refunds and so on. They investigate alleged breaches of the Competition Consumer Act and take action where appropriate. Formal decisions on breaches are made by the courts. So yeah, the Competition and Consumer Act. This is the bit that we all need to understand and know. It covers how businesses deal with suppliers, competitors, and customers. And now the specific section that applies to what we do is Section 18 around misleading or deceptive conduct. There is no absolutely clear definition of the phrase misleading or deceptive conduct under the Australian consumer law. However, courts generally take the term to mean conduct that leads or is likely to lead someone into error. Generally, there's no requirement for the conduct to be intentional. So you do need to be vigilant, as mistakes can be super expensive. You've all probably heard recently in the news about Qantas, and the ACCC has instituted legal proceedings saying it had advertised and sold tickets for flights that had already been cancelled. So at the moment, it's understood that they're seeking a record penalty of more than $250 million against Qantas to deter future issues like this. Which is double the penalty paid by Volkswagen in 2021 for making false representations about compliance with Australia's diesel emissions standards. So to avoid being misleading or deceptive in the work that we produce, it's really important to consider the overall impression that the advertising makes. It's not as simple as just knowing what font size the T's and C's legally need to be in. You need to consider the overall impression that it makes. And each ad or execution gets judged on a case-by-case basis. Penalties are really severe, and they increased late last year by up to 5 times their previous level. And they can flow through to the agency, which sounds slightly terrifying, but will only generally happen if you're found to have knowingly and actively engaged in misleading and deceiving the public. So what kind of alerts the ACCC? Now, they generally get involved in cases where advertisers are deliberately dancing with the truth in order to influence behavior. So unsubstantiated claims about quality or value or price, a big one, environmental or green claims. Influencer advertising is a big focus for the ACCC now. The word free, is it really free? Fine print and qualifications, comparative advertising, prize giveaways, misleading online reviews, and puffery, which is a great word. It does attract the ACCC because generally those are extreme claims, but it can also be a way of getting around the law because puffery is generally so over the top. It's sort of obviously humorous. The world's greatest cheesecake, is it really the world's greatest cheesecake? No, but we're allowed to sort of say that because it's really obvious that we're just playing with that kind of the world's greatest. Also worth mentioning here, financial services providers, they are also scrutinized by ASIC, so as well as the ACCC, and ASIC are also cracking down on greenwashing and what they call finfluencers sharing unlicensed financial advice. So let's have a look at a couple of examples of advertising that has recently been flagged by the ACCC. And this is actually just something I wanted to mention, that greenwashing being the priority in 2024, they have just published 8 principles to help businesses ensure any environmental marketing and advertising claims are clear and accurate. So you can download this report because this topic is not straightforward. They're going to release also some further guidance later this year for businesses on sort of how to make emissions and offset claims, and as well using trust marks as well. But yeah, do really tune into this because a lot of your clients will be wrestling with how to talk about legitimate environmental achievements and initiatives. But yeah, you can download the guide from the accc.gov.au or our member resource hub. So Trivago, this is one of the biggest fines we've seen handed down for misleading and deceptive conduct. Last year, the federal court found Trivago, which is part of Expedia, intentionally misled consumers and breached consumer law by representing its website as identifying the cheapest rates available for a given hotel. In fact, Trivago uses an algorithm which favors properties that paid Trivago the highest cost per click fee in determining its website rankings, and so often did not actually highlight the cheapest rates for consumers. The court also found Trivago's hotel room rate comparisons where they were using strike-through prices or text in different colors. This kind of misled consumers that they were getting a saving. But they were actually comparing an offer for a standard room with an offer for a luxury room at the same hotel. So this was a giant wake-up call for all comparison sites using this business model. Another one around sort of pricing messaging. Late last year, Airbnb was fined $15 million for tricking tens of thousands of customers into paying higher prices, and they will have to pay millions more in compensation. So this was actually a really subtle thing, but the ACCC alleged that Airbnb displayed prices to Australian users in US dollars, tricking them into paying more when the prices were converted. So Airbnb said that customers had agreed to be charged in US dollars because the abbreviation USD was written in tiny font at the final stage of the booking process. And this conduct, known as Aussie dollar representation, was deceptive and misled customers and was therefore in breach of Australia's consumer law. So a great example where technically they did have a USD there, but it was so small that the average consumer just did not clock it, and therefore it was misleading. This one was, again, another recent case from last year, still before the courts, so they haven't come to a decision, but this one is around the kind of use of free, the word free, 1 month memberships and early cancellation options, because the free subscription actually involved completing an 80-question compatibility quiz. But these memberships do not allow customers to properly communicate with matches. And they also were found that they were using sort of auto renewals being processed as 6, 12 or 24-month memberships, which kind of deprived customers of the chance to make informed choices about joining and renewing and how much to spend in doing so. So it just wasn't transparent enough. And sadly, eHarmony should have probably known better because they were consulted in 2016 when the ACCC actually developed the best practice guidelines for dating websites. So sadly, they fell foul of their own guidelines. So just some kind of key tips here. Think really carefully about the overall impression that the advertising makes. Is there additional information to be disclosed or substantiation is required? If you feel as the agency that you need to ask for this information from your client, you should feel totally empowered to do so, and really shows genuine leadership in the responsible and ethical execution of our role as marketing consultants. ACA members also, you can access free top-line guidance and discounted legal advice from Von Munster Legal. They can look at an ad or a concept or a script and give you some initial advice if you'd just like to be doubly sure. We also have a lot of fact sheets and legal learning modules available on our site too for ACA members. Okay, so that's kind of ACCC legal side. Let's get on to the bulk of today's presentation where we're going to look at lots more ads. So hopefully that is more interesting than the letter of the law. Ad standards and the AANA's Code of Ethics. So bit of background here. AANA stands for the Australian Association of National Advertisers. They're the I guess, to our clients what the Ad Council is to agencies, their industry body. The AANA represent their clients' or advertisers' interests, and they provide tools and guidance to protect and promote their industry standards. Ad Council works in partnership with the AANA on some initiatives, and one of the things we did partner with them on in 1998 was creating this code of ethics. So the aim of self-regulation is to maintain high advertising standards and protect consumers from being misled, and also provide a fast and free method for consumers to express their views about advertising. And believe me, they do have a lot of views. So Ad Standards was set up as an independent complaints handling system. And we will go through some of these cases today. But you should all kind of support this system internally by monitoring the various codes and the determinations that are made by the Ad Standards Community Panel, and keep your clients abreast of what's going on. The Ad Standards Community Panel is, they review the public complaints through a panel of representatives. They're completely independent of the industry, and they're designed to represent the diverse view of Australians. The panel's made up of people from lots of different backgrounds and all around Australia, all kind of with interesting perspectives that help them get a really balanced view of what is decent and reasonable in terms of advertising. The process, just so you're all aware, anyone can lodge a complaint with Ad Standards, and it only takes one single complaint to trigger the process. So the complaint gets made via Ad Standards website, it gets assessed, quick review, and then the advertiser gets notified that there's been a complaint, and they are invited to provide a response. And this is probably when the agency will get the call up as well. So then once the response has been received, the community panel meet to review the complaint and the response, and they reach a decision by a majority vote. It's pretty simple. If the complaint is upheld, the advertiser has 5 days to respond and either modify or remove the ad, and decisions are also published on the Ad Standards website. Now, you can ask for an independent review if you disagree with the decision, but there are costs associated with a review. So that's the process. The mediums that attract the most complaints, free-to-air TV has always been the highest, but the number of complaints that are now coming through for social media is really increasing each year. I think it went up to from 8% to 13% between 2021 and 2022. We're still waiting for the numbers for 2023, which should come out pretty soon. So let's dive into the Code of Ethics. It's the cornerstone of the self-regulatory system. Section 1's about competitor complaints. We won't look at that. Section 2 is about consumer complaints. And you can see here they're split into sort of 7 subsections, I guess. Discrimination, degrading, violence, sex, sexuality, nudity, language, health and safety, and distinguishable advertising. This is then supplemented by a few other codes. We won't have time to go through them all today, but these areas generally do have a higher level of regulation. So if you're working on an account that falls into any of these categories, advertising to children, food and bev, wagering, automotive, you should really build your expertise in the specific codes. The Environmental Claims Code currently being reviewed, and there is a draft version of it that has just been released for public and industry input as well. Scott, you've just a question on the chat in terms of intentionally getting complaints. You know, there's no rules about that. If you're happy and your client's happy to sort of be pulled up by ad standards and have that go through that process, go for it. It generally, it's just a slightly risky game in the sense that the more the industry is seen to be offending community standards or not upholding our self-regulatory system, what we do tend to do is sort of raise a bit of a red flag. And what then is now happening is the government is starting to get more and more interested in regulating advertising. So starting to want to get far more heavy-handed about what we're allowed to advertise, what we're allowed to say in advertising. The most extreme is kind of around junk food. There's a lot of push within the government to ban advertising all occasional foods due to an obesity problem and a health issues, whereas we would really like to find a way of responsibly advertising occasional foods. The other thing to consider, Scott, is that so many ads get complained about, and I would say the majority of the complaints are dismissed, but they will go through the process, but a lot of them are dismissed. It's probably the ones that are upheld that you really need to be careful of, because that is seen as maybe the ads that are maybe not doing a lot of good, not maybe being a very helpful or positive message to put out into the world. So as I say, it's a little bit nuanced, but yeah, just try and keep your kind of community hat on there. We don't want government breathing down our necks. Yeah. But, sexually explicit, cheeky ads can definitely work. If you, as we will talk about, think about the audience and the context. So the first section of the code deals with the complicated space of discrimination and vilification, which you'll see can be caused on a whole number of fronts, and they really can be hard to adjudicate as well. So the code says that advertising shall not portray people or depict material in a way which discriminates against or vilifies a person or section of the community on account of race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, age, sexual preference, religion, disability, mental illness, or political belief. So this Speedy Stories campaign from Foxtel, the idea here was in 15 seconds, a sort of a story could be told in a really rapidly condensed manner. As a result, it kind of parodied some entertainment tropes. And this particular one was intended as a humorous satire of romantic comedy tropes, where the ad shows two females, one wearing glasses, as a young man walks by. One of the friends comments that he doesn't even know you exist, at which point the second female removes her glasses and unties her hair in one quick movement. And almost immediately, the young man appears next to them and asks, "What's up?" And it ends with them walking together, holding hands. Now, the complaint to ad standards were along the lines of, it implies that people are more attractive if they do not wear glasses. There were a few other complaints as well around gender stereotypes and so on. But the one we're talking about today is this idea that of glasses and that being a perceived sight impairment. Foxtel argued that this was a light-hearted take on a well-worn rom-com storyline and that wearing glasses did not necessarily imply a disability. However, the panel felt that while the ad is depicting a common movie trope, they considered that the trope was outdated and not in line with modern depictions of teenage comedies, and that there are negative stereotypes around people who wear glasses being less attractive or socially awkward, and the depiction of a person being seen as more attractive when their glasses are removed, it shows people with a disability receiving less favorable treatment. So in this case, the panel concluded that the ad did indeed vilify a person, or section of the community on account of disability, and therefore it did breach section 2.1 of the code. And this is a great example, I think, of just a sort of an outdated trope. We all get it. We all use them as sort of shorthands to communicate an idea, but the community standards are changing and we need to stay in touch with that. Okay, so here's another one. Can anyone guess in the chat what aspect of this ad might have provoked complaints?
The 10K Bindi Walk, an event Prickly Pam Patterson was desperate to conquer. As the field of screams set feet afire, her rivals weakened. And when Kenya's "Oh no, I copped a bad one" fell at the pointy end, not even the officials could steal victory from the Aussie.
You too can make it look easy with Sportsbet's new popular same-game multi. See what the punters are liking and get on board. Popular same-game multi, new from Sportsbet.
So what do you think? What was the part of that ad that actually provoked the complaint? Has anyone got any sort of ideas looking at knowing that we're talking about discrimination and vilification? What was it that triggered the process? And it was quite a lengthy process, I might add. Anyone? No one? Athlete's name? Mike, you got it. Yeah, so the complaint around, there were a lot of complaints, but the one that we're going to talk about was that there was a racist remark. It referred to a person of African descent as, "Oh no, I copped a bad one." Now, the advertiser said the athlete's name is descriptive of what happened to her in the race, copping a bad bindi, which forces her out of the event. The panel reviewed this, and they considered that while the Australian athlete has a name, Prickly Pam Patterson, the Kenyan athlete's name is made as a joke and is mocking the pronunciation of some Kenyan names. And this was vilifying of the woman by humiliating and inciting ridicule of her and all Kenyans based on their names. So they upheld the complaint. Now, the advertiser requested an independent review. Remember, I said you can request an independent review if you really violently disagree with the panel's decision. So the independent reviewer looked at it. They suggested that the panel go back in for another look. So the panel then had another discussion about it. And as is often the way, the consideration is around humor. It's, this is all very lighthearted. Like, come on, this is not at all vilifying of a race. But the panel said, look, they acknowledged the importance of humor, but they justified their decision based on increasing discussion about issues of racism and discrimination, including recent media around abuse of Euro Cup players at the time. And the panel considered that this increase in community concern had led to a change in prevailing community standards, and that the humor in this ad is reflective of casual racism that is not appropriate in advertising. So on second review, the panel still determined that it vilified a section of the community on account of nationality, and it did breach section 2.1 of the code. All right, how about this one?
I have pineapple. I have a Whopper. Whopper pineapple. I have a barbecue. I have a summer. Summer barbecue. Whopper pineapple. Summer barbecue. Summer barbecue pineapple Whopper.
Okay, you get the idea. I mean, it's an awesome tune, but let's move on. So, of course, the complaints that came through, the ad is racist. The ad is clearly made for a white audience and is demeaning and caricatures people of Asian identity. Now, in this case, the advertiser, Hungry Jack's, confirmed that this is, in fact, a parody of the song Pen, Pineapple, Apple, Pen by a Japanese entertainer called Pikotaro. And Pikotaro is also the man in the ad performing the parody. So in this case, a depiction of a popular song by an Asian performer is not a negative stereotype. and they dismissed the complaint. The code was also updated in 2021. There's a much tighter definition now around harmful gender stereotypes. And, this again is about tropes, right? It's about cliched depictions of women or men, and they will always provoke complaints. It really doesn't take much, but you just have to examine the shorthand that you're using, so that you're not kind of falling back on the dumb blonde, the inept dad. You can still feature one gender, you can still show products that are designed for one gender, but again, this example here around Sportsbet, the beauty queen sort of with a big foolproof stamp on her, was found to basically be suggesting that all beauty queens are dumb, which was not considered to be appropriate. It incites ridicule of these women, so they upheld the complaint. But yeah, just one to really start to examine how you are talking about genders and whether is it helpful? Is it in service of that gender? Or is it kind of using really broad brushstrokes, or using negative stereotypes? They will generally breach the code. So, key tips and takeaways of section 2.1, when using stereotypes to challenge assumptions, be very clear in the messaging and purpose. Ensure that clarity of comprehension. Community standards around comedy tropes have changed. Get close to that, understand it, know that you are sort of remaining current and sensitive to how people feel. And this does apply at the brief writing stage. What is the human insight? What might be an outdated cliche? And really try and avoid using broad demographic groups to stereotype people. Consult with groups to ensure that your portrayals are sensitive and realistic. And there are some there around, boys play with trucks, girls with dolls, men or women failing to achieve a task, like, men failing at parenting tasks, women failing at driving, reading maps, etc., etc. Let's move on to section 2.2. This is about being exploitative or degrading, often what I call the honey birdette section. But this is where taking advantage of the sexual appeal of a person or group of people by depicting them as objects or commodities and focusing on their body parts, where it's not directly relevant to the product or service being advertised. So this is a pretty terrible ad for Eto oil, ran quite recently in Australian, I think it was in the Good Weekend or Weekend magazines. And while the artistic intention is to show the model in her natural state, the panel decided the ad employed sexual appeal in a way which is clearly focusing on the body of the woman and bears no direct relevance to the product being advertised. And I mean, these sort of ads are pretty rare, would never come from our member agencies, I don't think. So just have a quiet smile to you on that one. But if you're a honey birdette, this section of the code is a minefield, because ads must not portray people as commodities or objects to possess or focus on a body part that bears no resemblance to the product. It must not use children in any advertisements containing sexual appeal. And if you are advertising in a mass media, e.g. windows or out of home, be conscious that the audience may include children. So this ad that you can see from Honey Birdette, it was found to breach the code because it's impossible to tell if the women are intended to be attending the party as colleagues or as strippers. But there was an obvious imbalance between the men and women in this shot. And yeah, the other thing is a lot of Honey Birdette ads are in shop windows where the audience may include women. So what do you think about this one? What do you think the panel's assessment might have been for this ad? Is it in breach of the section 2.2?
As our planet heats up, mankind is suffering in its jobs. This is global warming, a mandemic sweating up the nether regions of 3.7 billion blokes. That's 7.4 billion units, sizzling, steaming, shriveling. My plums. I hope you like them well done. Hot planet, hot ball. So what are they at? We have to cut them off. Yep, just as I suspected. His hardware is cooking his software. The evidence is clear. Our boys are in some serious trouble. It's time to fight global warming by pulling on a pair of these, Bonds X10. They keep your boys cool, as they should be, with ball cooling technology, science. I urge you, join the fight today.
So lots of focusing on body parts, lots of sort of jokes about anatomy. So of course the complaints around, feeling like this was quite a crude ad, but in this case, the product is underwear. So Bonds is justified in showing the product and how it could be worn. The panel also felt that the men in the advertisement were depicted in a confident manner. So they decided that the ad did not employ sexual appeal in a manner which is exploitative or degrading of an individual, and therefore it did not breach section 2.2 of the code. So you can see there are exceptions, of course, to the rule. Mona gets away with it. This is a Facebook post for a new product, which inevitably provoked some complaints. Now, of course, while the product itself may be considered to be offensive, the advertisement for the product did not lower women in character or quality, did not employ sexual appeal in a manner which is exploitative, and it treated the issue of sexuality with sensitivity to the relevant, predominantly adult audience. This ad was on the Mona Facebook page, so it meant that it was a message by invitation rather than intrusion. The panel, when they reviewed this complaint, they also said, look, it's not within the purview of the panel to assess the name of an exhibition against the code, and the product was based on the title of the exhibition. So this one, again, the complaint was dismissed because of context and also because of the linkage to an exhibition. But yeah, we all know Mona likes to be a little bit provocative, so on brand for them. Section 2.3 is about violence. And this is where violence is being used in a way that is unnecessarily traumatic, particularly to children. And this is the second most sort of complained about area from 2022, with 17% of complaints relating to violence. And this can be about violence caused by people or by nature, or even just a strong suggestion of menace. And again, a lot of the time, it's about the audience that sees it. So this one, I think you've just got to have the kind of context in mind. And this may well mean that you've got to work closely with media agencies around placement and understanding where ads are going to be seen, and also the category of the product. So comedic violence, suggested violence, and actual violent scenes are only going to be justified if the audience profile and the product being advertised justifies violent scenes. A lot of complaints are related to scary content, which is, advertising movies or shows, and that can be justified, but the placement is often the deciding factor. So this one here, Disney Plus was recently found in breach of Section 2.3 for the placement of a Halloween trailer played on a digital billboard at a Perth train station. The ad was aimed at a general entertainment audience, and it was reviewed by Disney and the team at JC&Co against the AANA codes and the Outdoor Media Association guidelines for outdoor ads and deemed compliant. However, the ad standards panel had a different point of view. So citing that implied violence between people, so there were people being grabbed and dragged, people at risk of violence, which was evident by people screaming, and violence via the depiction of firearms. They felt that the violence in the ad was not justifiable in the context of advertising a streaming service to a broad audience, which would include children. So they upheld the complaint. So context here would have probably been fine in a more targeted media. Another case here from iSelect, stunt double Bobby Holland Hanton starred. He was a kind of, the idea being he's better value than Chris Hemsworth as his stunt double. The ad shows him on set where he speaks to camera. It's very clear that he's on set, but he goes on to punch someone in the face. He's hit in the face multiple times and is finally knocked to the ground by a group of men. And while the ad is clearly a portrayal of a staged fight and it's not a realistic scenario, it does depict a violent scene, which if you just caught a bit of it, it might seem a little brutal. And the panel considered that the depiction of a violent scene was not justifiable in the promotion of an insurance comparison service. So the context of the product meant a staged fistfight was not appropriate. I'm going to skip over that one. So key tips and takeaways is just about really looking at any sort of suggestion of violence, someone being about to commit violence, or if any recent trauma might be in the ad, like bushfires and accidents, etc. It should really only be used in the context of the product or service being advertised. Implied bullying also will likely breach the code. Advertising which uses confronting and graphic imagery to promote important health services would generally be seen as a justifiable use of violence. This recent Uber Eats ad featuring Paris Hilton and the Irwins was the third most complained about ad in 2022, as it implies a chihuahua is eaten by a snake. Now, the panel considered that they considered the context and found that while some viewers may find the scene uncomfortable or unpleasant, the suggestion of one animal eating another is not by itself violent. And as the ad did not portray violence, it did not breach Section 2.3 of the code. So it was dismissed. Section 2.4, this is always the one that gets the most complaints. Almost 30% of complaints relate to sex, sexuality, and nudity. Another awesome execution in the Eto campaign. The complaints centered around the sexualized poses of the models. And the advertiser rejected the complaint, saying the image portrayed protectiveness by the male and empowerment of the woman and an element of tenderness and trust. The panel did not agree. They felt that although it wasn't exploitative of women or men, it did contain sexuality and nudity, but that necessarily wasn't inappropriate for a predominantly adult audience. Remember, this was in kind of weekend newspapers and magazines. However, this is one for the producers out there. The specific pose and position of the male model's hands was seen to be strongly sexualized and not appropriate for a broad newspaper reading audience. So this is one where just the select of that particular pose was the thing that kind of made the panel uphold the complaint. Lots of complaints were also received in 2021 for the Grilled campaign, Grilled versus plastic toys. It was very entertaining, very silly, but 2 sections of the code were specific issues, violence and the sexuality and nudity section. It was meant to symbolize how fast food chains hook children with the promise of toys. But both of these are saying, like, in terms of violence, is it justifiable in the context of advertising burgers? Sex and sexuality, is it sensitive to the relative audience? Now, in terms of violence, the panel felt that the opening scene where the children were cornered in the alley and the clown opens his trench coat was menacing and suggestive of sexualized violence, and this was extremely inappropriate in an ad for burgers. So it did breach section 2.3 of the code. Sex and sexuality, the panel considered that this moment of implied exposure did constitute sexuality. And also there was another scene where the clown's pinned to the wall, his pants fall down so that he's exposed to the children, which is suggested nudity. And while it is mild, the panel felt that the ad did not treat this with sensitivity to the relevant audience. And so it was also found to breach section 2.4 of the code. So Grilled agreed to take steps to modify the ad to take into account the panel's concerns. This is one where I won't play the ad, but it's a largely naked guy walking around talking about saving water. Now, this, of course, attracted complaints, but the panel felt that in this instance, he was shown from a distance. There was no overt nudity. So most people shouldn't find this confronting or unacceptable, and it did, in fact, treat sex, sexuality, and nudity with sensitivity. So it did not breach this section of the code, and they dismissed the complaint.
I don't know how many loads of washing I've done this month.
Okay, language. Fairly self-explanatory, but words that are innocuous and in widespread and common use in the Australian vernacular, they are generally considered acceptable by the board. Now, again, provided they're used in a manner that's consistent with their colloquial usage, with gentle humour and not used in a demeaning or aggressive manner. So examples would be bugger, crap, bloody, cheap bastard, bum, shitload, shit, and bollocks. Yes, all of those are common vernacular Australianisms. Now, the board generally considers use of the F word unacceptable, but the phrase frigging or effing, when not used aggressively, is not considered obscene and is a more acceptable replacement. What do you think about this one? Does bleeping out swear words reduce the impact?
How long do you think this took me to cook? 1. Try 2 minutes because it's your foods and it's fresh. Unbelievable. I promise the best meals are your money back.
Not when it's a kid. You got it, Sharon. Well, yeah, there was a version where they didn't bleep out the unforking believable, and that was complained about. So then they redid it with it bleeped out, and then the panel actually felt that that just drew more attention to the fact that it was a swear word being used by a child in this context. And they do take a stricter view of strong, bad, or disrespectful language when it's spoken by a kid. So unfortunately, they felt that, it's not appropriate for use in advertising, and they upheld the complaint against YouFoods. So some key tips and takeaways here is using your common sense, of course. You can work around a lot of the issues here. Rhyming words are unlikely to be obscene when used in a lighthearted and humorous manner. Double entendres usually okay, especially when there's an interpretation which would be understood by children that is non-sexualized. So if they would kind of think of it quite innocently, then you will probably be able to get away with it. But do try and sort of err on the side of caution if there's ever any sense that children are going to be in the audience or they will understand it, or particularly if children are saying the words. And it's also worth mentioning again here, even if the language gets through, like, say, YouTube's guidelines, that is not a green light. It must also comply with the AANA Code of Ethics. Section 2.6, health and safety. This is another really broad one, actually, and probably much broader than you would imagine. A lot of complaints come through in this section. Now, this is about not depicting content that would encourage or condone unhealthy or unsafe behavior. So it includes road safety, physical safety, and psychological safety. There's a few examples of ads on this page which were complained about as portraying unsafe or unhealthy behavior. We've got a child using a stool to reach probiotics from a cupboard, which might encourage children to access medications. We have a recent TikTok ad from Foxtan that could encourage unsafe sun exposure behavior. We have Celeste Barber emerging from a fridge for Audible, and that's behavior that could indicate to children that refrigerators are a safe place to hide. We have an adult riding a bicycle without a helmet secured. And we also have an online product shot that may or may not be digitally altered, but the image is irresponsible because it promotes an unrealistic body image that would be unattainable through healthy practices. So you can see quite a lot of different aspects here to consider. This year's Christmas ad from Aldi came under fire for a couple of things recently, specifically a scene featuring a man barbecuing sausages inside. Now, also worth noting that the ad also offended with the depiction of a person's face superimposed on a roast potato because the skin texture offended someone with a severe skin condition and PTSD. So Aldi defended this ad because the scenes are so far-fetched and over the top that they are unbelievable. And the clip in question, which shows a person cooking sausages indoors using a charcoal burning barbecue with the room full of thick black smoke, was in no way realistic. However, the panel disagreed, saying the scene with the barbecue did not contain the same level of fantasy that the other scenes did. And the man and the people in the background attempting to fan smoke away from the smoke alarm, they're not particularly unrealistic or fantastical. So while the intent of this scene is to be lighthearted and comedic, this is a dangerous action which should not be encouraged or made light of. So they upheld the complaint, and Aldi removed the 60-second edit from their media plan. Now, if you are worried about the potato-faced trauma, the panel also sensibly concluded that the potato face is not shown to be demeaned or mocked, so that complaint was dismissed. Okay, have a look at this one.
Billy, there's a part of you thinking, with a metal fork and a steady hand, this last crumpet can be saved. Well, we want to talk to the other part. Your smart part. It knows a personalized long rate is a good decision. Just unplug the toaster, Billy.
So in this one, it's pretty subtle. So, not a black and white decision here, but the panel considered that in the 30-second version of this ad, the depiction of Billy considering placing a fork into a toaster is a strongly suggestive image. So that's the one that we just watched. And it undermines an important public safety issue, even when the action does not actually occur. So they felt that this 30-second did breach the code. The 15-second version was okay, though, because the fork toaster moment was fleeting and didn't depict or really focus on the unsafe behavior. Again, this is about, it's an edit, right? It's just the edit that is, it's subtle, but you have to be really vigilant around Are you undermining a public safety message by playing this ad? So please be vigilant. They really do cover so many different scenarios and dynamics. Machinery, electricity and water, farming equipment, any depiction of binge drinking, wearing correct PPE in dangerous situations, of course, road rules, and driver distraction will come up in this section. Unrealistic or unhealthy body images we talked about. Sun safety and skin cancer risk is so important. We mustn't be promoting that kind of behavior in advertising. It's a really big health risk in Australia. Mobile phone distractions, any sign of bullying behaviors or strong power imbalance could also come up in this health and safety. Remember, it's around that psychosocial safety as well, not just physical. And also just any discussion of suicide to be treated with caution. So if you're ever doing an ad that is for a charity or anything like that, make sure you always include contact information for Lifeline, Kids Helpline or similar, and just be conscious of the audience and if there are any children involved in the campaign or likely to watch the campaign, just be super careful. Okay, last section of the code is distinguishable advertising, and this is largely inspired by the growth in influencer marketing, with more brands using influencers as part of the marketing mix. And the Code of Ethics does apply to all forms of advertising and requires advertisers to ensure that any ads in any medium are clearly distinguishable as advertising. So up until quite recently, this sort of requirement was pretty grey, but the new code specifies that you, as advertisers, you really must ensure that you're clearly flagging ads as such. And there have been lots of complaints that have been triggered by this clearer code, mostly because of the lack of commercial transparency in work with influencers. They might have been paid, they might have received free products or received some kind of value in kind, or even just invited to attend events where they would likely post about the product. So you must ensure that any kind of influencer work has explicit disclosure as part of the conditions. Now that means it's not just about putting a little hashtag spawn buried somewhere in the caption. You really should be using ad, advert, paid partnership flags. And you can see there is even Kim Kardashian gets fined for not being quite clear whether she was being paid for promoting a cryptocurrency. But this is a big area of focus for the ACCC as well. So to avoid complaints, just be really clear that influencers using those kind of hashtags or the paid partnership with location labels. We'd encourage everyone who is working with influence to connect with the Australian Influencer Marketing Council for guidance, because they've actually developed specific guides around therapeutic goods and alcohol campaigns. And also, again, our legal partner, Von Munster, they were involved in developing the best practice guides, so they can definitely help with any questions. Also, ASIC, remember we talked about ASIC being the other enforcer as well as the ACCC. They have published a fact sheet around using finfluencers as well to help guide that area if you're working with anything to do with financial services. Now, we won't go through these because we don't have enough time, but again, just a reminder that there are a bunch of product-specific codes for alcohol advertising, ABAC, food and beverage advertising, wagering, and the FCAI automotive code. I will just say that the ABAC scheme, it's super important if you're working on a brand, an alcohol brand or a no low alcohol brand. You need to make sure that everyone in the team is across the ABAC code. It has just recently been updated. So that's why it's worth flagging that they've kind of made some changes around audience definitions. They've also put a lot more information and detail around brands that are advertising alcohol alternatives, such as no or low alcohol ranges. But you can see here, they recently ruled against Asahi's hard solo range because the recognition and familiarity of the solo branding on the packaging creates an illusion of a smooth transition from a non-alcoholic to an alcoholic beverage for minors. So they've had to actually scrap the entire product line, and they will be relaunching it under a new brand name. And ABAC does have some online training resources. So anyone working on an alcohol brand, please do go into abac.org.au. You can complete the online training course. Doesn't take that long, about an hour. You get a little certificate at the end. And you can also book a 1.5 hour tailored workshop with ABAC. And we also recommend that you use the alcohol advertising pre-vetting service as early in the process as possible. Food and beverage code, as mentioned, this is very much concerned with advertising that's directed at or maybe seen by children. We ran a dedicated webinar on the updated code at late 2021. Where we talk in more detail about the updates. So you can watch that recording via our website. Gambling and wagering advertising codes. This is another specific code we won't go through, but needless to say, there are plenty of restrictions on ads that promote gambling. Mostly common sense, but please ensure you're across the details if you work on a relevant client. Environmental claims. This is a big one. We mentioned that the ACCC has released formal guidance on environmental claims in December, and the AANA's more detailed code for advertisers is undergoing formal review, and that will bring Australia into line with international best practice. We've contributed and reviewed the code, and we will continue to do so until it is actually formally released later this year. Now, in terms of environmental claims, this is about ensuring that all Australian advertisers are applying rigorous standards when making environmental claims and increase the community trust in the claims appearing in advertising, because the worst thing is where ads are overstating an environmental benefit. So you really need to be careful that you're not overstating, you're not making claims that can't be substantiated based on full life cycle assessments. For instance, here's just a quick example. This one is seen to be misleading because natural gas, greener than anything you're cooking tonight was the headline. And the complaints came through that it is a high carbon intensive fuel that is not greener than zero emission renewable energy. Now, the advertiser defended the campaign with the claim that natural gas is the cleaner option than coal-produced electricity, but not necessarily the cleanest energy fuel. Now, the panel considered that the overall impression for an average consumer would be that natural gas is cleaner and greener than any alternate method of cooking that they could use. And the only other reference to other potential sources was greener than anything, without specifying a comparison with electricity from the grid. So really, the argument was kind of implied. It was not explicit. And in this case, the environmental claim was determined to be misleading or deceptive, and the claim was upheld. Vague statements in advertising relating to sustainability. This campaign from Suncorp used the tagline, "Banking you can feel good about." And the complaint predictably questioned the strength and veracity of these claims. Suncorp was able to refer the panel to its climate change action plan, its lending portfolio, and sensitive standards on their website, and the reported progress that they were making in their annual reports. So in this case, the panel agreed the wording in the ad is vague, not particularly specific in detailing how climate action will be achieved by Suncorp. However, the additional information provided did show that the brand was taking steps which would be considered by ordinary and reasonable people to be climate action. So they dismissed the complaint on this one. Let's keep an eye, though, on this sort of ad, because I think we can expect much tighter definitions and criteria in the updated code when it's released later this year. And we will definitely run dedicated webinars for members on the environmental claim code when that happens.
Word.
But yes, we are pretty much now out of time. So I just wanted to wrap up with just a quick summary. It's great that you've attended this webinar, but you will get an email afterwards. There'll be lots more links to resources in that email. Please feel free to get in touch with our legal partner if you would like 2 free top-line guidance sessions on work that you're doing. We do recommend that you get into the ad standards site and have a look at rulings either for your client or for the category or for the media that you're working in, so that you are actually aware of the types of complaints that are being made. If you're working on alcohol, take the ABAC test and ensure that you are across the new code update and that you're using ABAC pre-vetting and free TV pre-checks. You can also use AdCheck for any therapeutic goods TVCs. We have a legal lowdown webinar and legal learnings modules available for our members to upgrade your understanding of consumer law topics like trademarks and passing off. Dive into those product-specific codes if you work on automotive, wagering, or marketing to children. And yeah, please encourage your teams to sign up for the next Codes and Compliance workshop. It's scheduled for, I think it's the 28th of May. And also just make sure that you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter where we do share updates from the AANA, ABAC, etc., to keep you all informed. So I hope that was good. I hope that was interesting. Thank you again for coming along and spending time on this really important topic. It does matter. Professional standards does matter. And as I say, more information will come through in a follow-up email to you all. And if you have any questions, please do get in touch.